Thank you all for being here this evening. My name is Audra Breidendorf, and I work with Inspiritus at our Nashville office. My title is Community Engagement Specialist. So it's my job to kind of make sure people in the Nashville community know about Inspiritus and all the different volunteer opportunities that we have. And so I'm glad that you all are here tonight. I will start by kind of talking a little bit about Inspiritus, share a little bit about the refugee process, and then we're going to jump over to Sarah. She'll introduce herself, talk a bit more about policy changes, and then Ashley will come on later and kind of talk about the steps that we can take and the calls to action that we have for the community to kind of surround the refugees and immigrants that we serve. So about Inspiritus, we are a nonprofit organization that has been around for over 40 years. We've been serving people in the Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama state areas. And we've been resettling families for those 40 years. And our mission, as it says on the slide, is to really guide individuals and families from that path of just surviving to thriving. So we want to empower those people who have had their lives disrupted in various ways, and we want to help them discover their strengths, their resilience, and we want to accompany them as they just keep growing and continue to be like vibrant contributors to their communities. So just kind of what that looks like when a person first arrives to the United States and we're helping them get settled. We want to make sure those basic needs are met as soon as possible. So we meet them even at the airport with a warm meal right after that. And we have a place for them to stay. And we're just making sure they are feeling safe there. And we want to provide that safety and stability as they are getting back on their feet. So we're helping people get jobs, generate their own income, because we do eventually want to see that economic stability and that self-sufficiency where they can take care of themselves. And the goal is that we wouldn't have to be with them forever, that they could be on their own, a contributing member to society and helping them have the skills that they need to become a citizen one day and keep just thriving during their life here in America. Sarah, my screen is blank. I'm not sure. There we go. Okay, thank you. Just a quick snippet about who a refugee is. And so a refugee historically is someone who has a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And they have had to flee their country to another country. And then here are a couple of things to know about refugee resettlement. So again, historically, the process has looked like this. So refugees do not apply for resettlement themselves. Once they have gotten to this other location, the UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, they identify the most vulnerable cases that can be considered for resettlement. From there, again, it's only for those most vulnerable people, and they must fit at least one category. One of these following categories could be medical needs, children at risk, women and girls at risk, or survivors of violence or torture. Another requirement is, another fact is countries, governments get to decide which refugees to admit for resettlement. So in addition to the UNHCR screening process, the United States does their own vetting process that I believe covers 8 different agencies. And takes many years to decide whether or not we will accept someone as a refugee to resettle here. Then people who have committed serious crimes or might pose some sort of security threat are not eligible for refugee status or resettlement here in the United States. And then another important note is that only 1% of people who have fled their countries and sought out resettlement, only 1% of those people are ever resettled somewhere else. So it is a very stringent process that it's hard to find a place. So Sarah will take over from here.
Hey, Sarah, you're muted.
There we go. Hi. I'm glad you all are here today. I am Sarah Burke. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Inspiritus, and I oversee our community engagement in Atlanta and Savannah, Georgia, and then also our team Audra in Nashville and Ashley, who you'll meet a little bit later, in Birmingham. So I am going to switch back over to my slides. I can't see everyone. And Audra just explained the historic definition of a refugee. And I'm going to talk about, today we're going to talk about some of the policies that have come into effect in the past, really in the past few weeks. There's so many things that have happened in the past year that I would have to keep you guys probably overnight to cover it all. So we decided we would just touch on a few of the most recent changes, how they are impacting Inspiritus, and then also the people that you are walking alongside. So I wanted to start with Afrikaners as an exception to what Audra just explained. In February of last year, President Trump issued an executive order that formally established a policy to prioritize resettlement of Afrikaners. As Audra just mentioned, they're historically under both standard international and U.S. law. A refugee is typically someone who has fled their country of origin due to a well-founded fear of persecution or fear of persecution. I've been teaching this orientation for 12 years, and for 12 years I've had a very clear definition of exactly what a refugee is and what they will have had to experience in order to qualify for refugee status. That changed last year in February under this new executive order. And it was a significant departure from the standard refugee procedures in a few specific ways. The definition of a refugee, like I said, historically included having to prove that you have been persecuted or well-founded fear of persecution. But under this new executive order, it specifically defines Afrikaner refugee as someone who is an Afrikaner from South Africa who is escaping government-sponsored race-based discrimination, citing South Africa's 2024 land reform policies. Historically, I've always taught that in order to qualify as a refugee, you had to flee your home country and cross an international border and apply for refugee status in a secondary country. Under this executive order, it allows in-country processing for Afrikaners, and it allows individuals who have not crossed an international border to qualify as under refugee status. So while in-country processing has historically been used for specific groups, a couple of examples in Cuba or Iraq, is extremely rare and usually reserved for extreme circumstances. I also historically would have talked about how many years it takes to go through this vetting process. Refugees historically have been the most thoroughly vetted immigrant of any immigration status. But under this executive order, Afrikaners are allowed expedited vetting and are fast-tracked. And our first Afrikaners arrived in the U.S. in May of 2025 after this executive order in February. Reports indicate that there was administrative pressure to approve cases, even as the broader United States Refugees Admissions Program remained suspended for most of the other populations last year. It also, one last change was the resettlement priority for the U.S. for fiscal year 2026, which started October 1st, 2025. The administration set a record low refugee cap of 7,500. With the vast majority of those slots reserved specifically for Afrikaners. So we're going to get a little bit more into this program and how it impacts Inspiritus a little later. I kind of moved the slide back and forth, honestly, but I wanted to talk about, if we're going to talk about, the first three slides are who are a refugee, I think it matters for you to understand and hear that this is a change. That is one of the biggest changes that I think that has happened in the past year. All right, so what are we going to talk about in this training? I think everyone who's come here has come with some level of curiosity as to what we're going to cover, because there have been so many changes. And to tell you the truth, I was literally updating these slides in the past hour because things just change so fast. So there's, like I said, there's no way for me to cover all of the changes in the past year in a timely manner. So I want you to know ahead of time what things we're going to cover. And if these things aren't interesting to you, you can leave and get the recording later. Or if you were like, oh, I was really hoping to, to hear more about this, now you'll know about how long in the presentation you're going to need to stay to get your questions answered. So we're going to cover the transition of resettlement from the State Department to the Department of Health and Human Services. We're going to cover a change in food stamps and Medicaid for refugee and immigrants. We're going to cover a policy change in green cards and a travel ban for many countries. We're going to cover something called Operation Paris, which we've seen primarily in Minnesota, but has shown up in some other states. We're going to talk about ramped up ICE operations, but I will be clear here that this is not going to be a training specifically for ICE and how to engage with or not engage with ICE. I am planning to host a training for those who are interested in how to or not to engage with ICE in the coming days. And so there'll be an opportunity at the end for you to submit your information if you want me to share the link to that presentation once it's scheduled. Today, we're going to talk more about what you can do right now, a little bit about what's happening. Remember that we work in 3 different states in refugee resettlement, and we have people, Audra and Ashley are representing Tennessee and Alabama. I'm here in Georgia. So we're seeing, different things across the different states. And I'm not really ready to speak to specifics around ICE and how it's impacting our clients today. I'm just going to talk about some things you can start doing right now and things maybe you could look toward to do in the coming days. And then we're going to talk about advocacy and what you can do. I think that the most common question I get is, I want to do something. What can I do? And I want you to walk away from this training with everyone feeling like there's something that they can do. So I'm in a variety of ways that you can support Inspiritus, support immigrants, and support the work that we do. And hopefully out of that variety of lists, you'll be able to take something and say, okay, that's the one thing I know that I can do. Whether it's giving your time, giving your money, giving things like that, I want you to be able to feel like there was something that you can walk away with and do. So let's start with the Program of Initial Resettlement, PIR. May or may not have heard this, but in late 2025, the government underwent a fundamental restructuring of its refugee resettlement system. The shift moved the primary responsibility for domestic resettlement from the State Department, the Department of State, to the Department of Health and Human Services. And it introduced a new framework called Program of Initial Resettlement. Let's talk a little bit about what that means and then and how that change is impacting us. So historically, the refugee process was split between 2 agencies. We have PRM, which is located in the Department of State, and it managed overseas processing in the first 30 to 90 days of reception and placement through national nonprofit organizations like Inspiritus. For those of you on the call who've been through my volunteer orientation and have volunteered with Inspiritus, all of this you have some familiarity of, right? You most likely have worked with new families who have arrived through the RMP program, reception and placement, and have worked with them in their first 30 to 90 days. So you probably have some, if you've worked with volunteers, with clients as a volunteer for Inspiritus, you will know some of the financial support they receive, some of the requirements that we had as far as setting up an apartment, getting them kids enrolled in school, clients, register for certain public benefits, things like that. And then we had ORR, which was already located in the Health and Human Services Department, and it managed the longer term integration. So that's where medical assistance, job training, certain cash assistance was already housed out of ORR. The change in what took place was the reception and placement function were stripped from the State Department and transferred entirely over to ORR and the Health and Human Services. Under this under the Office of Refugee Resettlement, it was now called the Program of Initial Resettlement. So there is no longer RMP. That matters to the people who have, who have been working with clients through who RMP may be familiar to you. It's an acronym that we use all the time. And I think it's important to start this training just saying that is no longer a program. We do not have RMP. We have, program of initial resettlement, and it has drastically changed how refugees are placed in American communities. One of the major policy changes was the reorganization coincides with several restrictive changes to the benefits and the number of refugees. Previously, the ceiling was 125,000, and now it's 7,500, which is not only a historic low, but as I mentioned in one of the first slides, the vast majority of those 7,500 are Afrikaners who, under the traditional definition, don't even qualify as refugees. So previously, the presidential determination was a collaboration with other resettlement countries that focused on global relief. Now it's primarily Afrikaners from South Africa who have not gone through the refugee vetting process and don't qualify as a refugee under the historic definition. I'll say it again. Another change is previously refugees were eligible for 12 months of Medicaid and benefits after their arrival. Now they are only eligible for 4 months. So I want to mention that Inspiritus has chosen to not participate in this program of initial resettlement, but for a few different reasons. But one of them being that we, Afrikaners do not qualify under the historic definition. We don't believe that it aligns with President Carter's intent for the program. We also have a hard time justifying bringing people to the US with such restrictive benefits and support, and to a country that now may or may not be safe for them. And so we've been grappling with how ethical it is to resettle someone from a country where they aren't safe into a country where they may or may not be safe. This is the first time in our history that we've had to ask that question. Historically, I stood before you at volunteer orientations, and we're talking about how even though it's hard to resettle as a refugee, and even though learning the language and adjusting to the culture and finding a job and all of those things are really difficult, at least you knew that you and your family were safe. And that was one of the pinnacle, that we would go back to say, even though this is hard, you're okay, you're safe. And we can't say that now. And so we don't feel comfortable participating in a program that we aren't able to give that assurance to right now. Another executive order is called Realigning the United States Refugee Admissions Program. So previously, prior to the One Big Beautiful Bill, U.S. citizens and certain lawfully present non-citizens, refugees and immigrants under that category were eligible for SNAP or food stamp benefits if they met other income and non-financial requirements for the program. Lawfully present non-citizens groups were eligible for SNAP, including refugees, asylees, victims of trafficking, Amerindians, Cuban and Haitian entrants, Iraqis, and Afghan special immigrant visas, just a list of different immigration statuses that historically were eligible for food stamps, SNAP benefits, if they were low income and qualified. The new law eliminates the text in the Food and Nutrition Act that made refugees eligible for SNAP, and now renders a lot of refugees ineligible for SNAP upon arrival. The rewritten text also excludes other immigrant groups from SNAP eligibility, such as asylees, victims of trafficking, and survivors of domestic violence. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act ended SNAP eligibility for several refugees, asylees, and other humanitarian groups. And although lawful permanent residents, those who have a green card, remain eligible for SNAP benefits, state early implementation has mistakenly cut off some of those who have a green card and should still qualify. So we are facing some food insecurity for many people who were brought to the United States with the assurance that they would have support for a certain amount of time in these ways. Another policy change is the travel ban and green card applications are now on hold for the following 75 countries. I'm going to slow down a little bit. I will send the slides out as well as the recording. But if you want to take a look at this exhaustive list or screenshot it or take a photo of it, because if you are working with clients from any of these countries and who have come as a refugee or under a different immigration status, but specifically as a refugee who are supposed to apply for their green card within the first year of arrival, I'll remind you that historically refugees are permanent legal residents of the U.S. They're here legally. They came legally. They came at the invitation of our U.S. government through the third country resettlement program. And they are permanent legal residents as long as they don't commit a crime, which puts them at risk for deportation, always has. That hasn't changed. And now refugees and other asylees or asylee applicants now have their applications on hold. So while they're required, and if you see a country on this list and you're working with someone from this country, we still want them to come apply for their green card. We still want them to come meet with our immigration team, go through the green card application process, because we want everyone to remain in compliance. And we don't ever want it to be because of something they did or didn't do that they're denied ultimately. So we want to make sure that their documents are signed and submitted and date stamped in the time that has historically been required. But what this means is once that application is submitted, who knows? Who knows how long, if it'll be approved, if it'll be looked at. It could be going into a black hole. We're really not sure. Ideally, people who come from countries on this list who have submitted their green card will not move, because if you move and your documents go to your old address, or you have to do a change of address, it could complicate it even further. So our advice for clients who are coming from countries on this list are to submit their documents, apply for a green card, and stay where you are and wait. And that's all we can do for now. What that does mean, though, is that their work authorization, the refugees are eligible to work the day they arrive in the US. They come with the EAD, with an employment authorization document that will expire. And that is going to make it challenging for a lot of people who came here legally to continue to work legally. I don't have an answer for that. I don't have a solution. I'm really glad that I can't actually see your face right now, because I imagine several of you are feeling confused and frustrated and despair, which are all feelings that our staff have felt in the past few weeks. So for now, they are welcome to come meet with our immigration team if they have questions, but the truth is we don't have answers if they are coming from a country on this list. If you're working with someone who is not coming from a country who is not on this list, same thing applies. Apply for your green card and wait. How long is it going to take? Unsure. Historically, I could tell you green card applications are typically taking this amount of time. Right now, there is no typical. It changes all the time. And I think this is a good time to say that everyone who is an immigrant of any sort, even we have, I have coworkers who are citizens, naturalized citizens in this country, are carrying copies of their documents. I would encourage you to encourage the people that you're working with to not carry their original documents. If they lose those, their I-94, their passport, their green card, if they have it, it may be impossible for them to get it replaced. That may not happen for them. We can try, but everything is taking longer, and that is an opportunity for it to be denied. Even though it shouldn't be, it should just be a replacement. Nothing has changed in your status. we are seeing the government use opportunities like that to deny people. So they should carry copies, and their actual documents should be in a safe place that is not going to get lost and hopefully not stolen. It is a good idea to have, if you are not American born, to have your documents on you. Now, we are seeing people detained that are citizens of the US, and so it may or may not be enough. Okay, I'll get to that when we talk about ICE. All right, let's talk about another policy. Operation Paris. I wish I could see a show of hands of how many people have heard of this, because I'm guessing that a lot of people haven't. But Operation Paris was a new effort by the Department of Human Services to re-examine thousands of refugee cases in Minnesota. This is despite refugees already being the most vetted population to arrive in the United States. For reference, I mentioned this earlier, it takes on average for 2 years for a refugee to get through the rigorous United States vetting process just to qualify as a refugee. Average stay in a refugee camp is 18 years. And there are 8 federal agencies involved in the refugee screening process. That is just to qualify as a refugee. And now they are being forced to reprove their status. So since January 9th, dozens of lawfully present refugees in Minnesota have been arrested, detained, and many of whom were transferred to detention facilities in Texas, including children. I have a good news slide at the end of this. I don't want to leave you with all bad news. And one of them is an update on Operation Paris. So we can also confirm that implementation of Operation Paris has spread to other states. Good news, we're already there. Good, we're already to the good news, which is great. Advocacy works. The Senate has successfully reached a deal to separate Department of Homeland Security funding from a larger spending package. And the decision to split the bill was a significant pivot intended to avert a total government shutdown while allowing intense negotiations over federal immigration policy. And I checked literally just before this presentation to see if there had been any update. And the update is that the advocacy is working. There was a President Trump signed into law yesterday a funding bill to fund several departments, but the Homeland Security funding they've got another week to negotiate that. It's kind of unheard of that this one piece was pulled out separately to be voted on separately, to be negotiated separately, and that is because of advocacy. People are calling their representatives, marching and protesting and speaking up, and it's working. Another piece of good news is that I just mentioned Operation Paris. A federal judge issued a temporary restraining order halting the arrest and deportation of refugees under that operation. And I really wanted to include this. I liked that. Well, the judge concluded the refugee and organizational plaintiffs are likely to succeed on the merits of their claim because they're one of the most vetted immigration statuses. I actually didn't include it. So one of the things I loved that was the judge said that they had to make sure that people were not released out into the cold, and they had to organize the return of them to their homes. And I thought that was really beautiful thing that the judge did. And then the last piece of good news for now is that just yesterday, the judge blocked the Trump administration's stripping of Haitians' temporary protected status. We have up to 350,000 Haitians who legally live and work in the US due to having been granted a temporary protection status, and that was going to be revoked, and they were all going to be here. They were told they could be here. TPO is usually 2 years, and then in the middle of that, it was being stripped of them, and they were going to be here illegally, but only because of this change in the law, and that would have made them eligible for deportation. So really good news that has been halted for now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about ICE. What can you do? On the left side here, you see I've got what is called a red card. Red cards are little red cards, just as they are as they look and are called. And on one side, it has English. On the other side, it can be translated into multiple different languages. You can order them. I have the link on one of the slides. So when I send this out, if you're interested, you can order them. You can also print them for free at that same website. We have them at our office. We hand them out to clients. But it is something you can do. You can have them in your car, in your bag, and you can share those with people that you think, are at risk of having their rights violated. So they have the right to not open the door. They have the right to not answer any questions, to not sign anything, and without a lawyer. So one of the things you can do is hand out red cards. You can know your rights yourself, and you can share the rights with other people. You can also become a constitutional observer. That's someone who acts as a third-party witness. You've seen this a lot in Minnesota. And so I thought it would be really good to talk about what you legally can do as a constitutional observer and what things you shouldn't do, just so that if you're out in the community and are wanting to do something, you can feel a little bit more comfortable that you are not breaking laws and that you are following the laws that are there. So you are allowed to record video, take photos, note details like badge numbers, license plates, and the presence or absence of a judicial warrant. So an immigration and customs enforcement officer, if they have a warrant, there are two types of warrants. There's those that are signed by a judicial judge, and there's those that are signed by a immigration official. Most often they have warrants signed by an immigration official, and that is not allow them to enter a private place that is locked. So we have actually examples up in our office so we can tell the difference. But if you were looking at it, you can look and see that it says judicial warrant. Again, often you can carry red cards, know your rights materials to hand out in the community, informing them of their right to remain silent, their right to refuse entry without a warrant signed by a judge. You are, you can, if you want, wear a badge or a vest to discourage the use of excessive force or racial profiling. You can provide footage and documentation to immigration attorneys who can use it in court to challenge a detention if rights were violated. And to maintain legal standing and safety, you should follow the strict rules. You should never physically block an arrest or touch an agent, as this can lead to charges of obstruction of justice. You should never encourage someone else to, even to hide. You shouldn't encourage them to hide or to run. You should encourage them to remind them of their rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right, to remain behind a locked door if there's not a warrant. You should stay at least 8 to 10 feet away from the action, usually on public sidewalks. You can verbally identify yourself as a constitutional observer to the agents on site. On the left side, let's see. So you can join watch groups in your area. There's some on Facebook, WhatsApp, and Signal. These are really helpful for the community to know if there is immigration activity in the area. But if you are going to share on any social media or online activity that you see, it's really helpful if you follow the SALUTE acronym, which is size and strength of the group of agents. So how many people are you seeing? What are they wearing? Can you give specific detail as to what cross streets they're at, the address of the location they're at? How are they dressed? Are they wearing masks? Are they wearing jeans? Do they have on bulletproof vests? Do they have body camera? Are there any identifying markers? Does it say police, even though they're immigration and customs enforcement? The time and date is really important, because when I've noticed this even in some of the groups that I'm in, the watch groups that I'm in, people will telephone share it, right? They'll share like, oh, I saw a group at the QT on the corner of so and so and so and so. And then someone else will say, oh, they saw, ICE operation at the QT, and then it keeps going. But it can take an hour, 2 hours, even a couple of days for that information to spread amongst the group. And then by the time I'm hearing it like it's current activity. And I don't know that it's 6 people before was sharing this, and that actually happened 2 days ago. So it's really important to share the time and date that you saw the activity. And that is even something you can help with in a watch group. My sister called me the other day, and because I was on the way to her house, and said, hey, there is a report of activity in these 2 locations. You're going to drive by those on my way to my house. Do you mind checking to see if there are still ICE agents there, how many, and can you verify that they are there? At one location, they weren't anymore, so she was actually able to put it in the watch group so that people know that that's no longer a concern. And then at another location there was, and it was 1 vehicle, and I was able to give more details than had been put in the watch group initially. So this is something really tangible and helpful that you can do just by living in your community. And then also include, the type of vehicle, how many vehicles, and things like that. All right, so let's talk about what does this mean for the refugees that you are volunteering with. We at Inspiritus are actively fundraising to supplement SNAP benefits, where we are constantly trying to keep a small amount of emergency funds for people who have lost their benefits and are facing food insecurity. Everyone, I've mentioned this already, but everyone who's arrived in the past 18 months should meet with the immigration team to apply for their green card, even if they're from a country that's on the travel ban list. I did want to mention that we haven't encountered, Operation Paris activities in the states that we are serving in. Doesn't mean that it won't happen in the coming days. I already said this, but again, clients should keep copies of their documents. And families should have a plan for what will happen with their children if they are detained. We are getting multiple reports of parents that are being detained and children are at school and then have no one to go home to. We are not the rescue for that. And Inspiritus case managers and Inspiritus staff are not the people who need to be stepping in and taking care of those children in lieu of their parents. You as a volunteer are not really even the person who needs to do that. You are not equipped for that. You're not, from their culture, speaking their language. You're not the best next person. They should be looking in their own community and within their own family and identifying who is going to take care of their kids in the event that they were detained and for how long. And kind of, that people within the community and within their family are going to be able to maintain normalcy for those children better than you or I are. But there should be a plan in place. They should, make sure that they have emergency contacts, people that they know that they can call. And they should know, again, not to say anything. We are seeing a lot of people who, I'm hearing reports from my colleagues that work at agencies in Minnesota that refugees who are here legally can be detained and then are released. More often than not is the ones who say nothing. They say nothing, and then law enforcement has nothing on them. They have nothing to hold them on. They have to release them because they are here legally. When people start talking, then oftentimes law enforcement finds something that they can hold them on longer. So you just really, really, really want to emphasize the right to silence. All right, Ashley.
Sorry about that. Hello, my name is Ashley Douthard, and I am the community engagement for Birmingham. And just gonna go over the slide here about call to action. we want everybody to contact your local representatives and advocates, raise awareness in your communities of issues facing migrants, raise your voice locally with your school board, your county, and your state legislature, share resources like Know Your Rights information, and make toolkits. Make toolkits like family preparation plans available to people in your community. Also donate. Resettlement agencies like Inspiritus are relying on donations to cover the gap in funding that have been lost. Take care of yourself. Always put your oxygen mask on first. New Americans celebration is on February the 12th. That's from 9 to 12 in the Georgia State Capitol. The Hunger Walk is in Atlanta on March 15th from 12 to 4. And another thing is also just fill out this form to be notified as needs may arise. And this is our contact list for Inspiritus for the community engagement with volunteers. Obviously, you have me at the top, Birmingham, Ashley Douthard, and then Nashville is Audra. And then for Atlanta and Savannah is Sarah.